Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Goldman. I'm a senior UX researcher contract at Nerdwallet. And during this session, we're going to be talking about how research feeds into design, how research teams are organized, the implications that has, and how, if you're a researcher or a designer, how you can work better together. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking a bit about organizational structure. We'll talk about how projects can be structured and some fresh takes on how to organize projects, and some final thoughts about how you can level up your game as a researcher, or as a designer for that matter. So, a bit about me first. I mentioned right now I'm a contract senior UX researcher at Nerdwallet, and before that I was at London Club, and before that I was at Wells Fargo. So I've had the opportunity to see how research is organized in a really broad variety of ways. And before that, I was at Institute for the Future, which is a whole different approach to research. And so hopefully this presentation kind of sheds light and shows basically how looking at research in different ways, you can see how that impacts exactly how research plays out. So let's talk about organization design for a minute. So research oftentimes in companies is essentially centered within design. So it is either a function that designers themselves play, or it is a separate team that sits within design. And essentially what that means is that in companies like that, projects come from PMs within product. And this is a simplified model, obviously. And then they reach designers, and then the designers reach out to researchers on the team, and the researchers do that research, or the designers are the ones doing that research. So the function of research sits within design, and then that leads back into design prototyping and all of that stuff. And so in this model, research is centered within design. So pros and cons of this. Pro is it's very fast and action-oriented, and there's clear roles and responsibilities. The project comes to the designer. They say, I feel we need to research this. The researchers research it, and then they come back and they say, this is what we've learned, and then that informs prototyping. But the problems should be obvious as well, that it's way too tactical, way too near term. So most of what research is doing is just fulfilling a specific immediate problem that design has, rather than understanding user behavior in general. So this model tends to lead to results that are less user-focused. Another model is where research is parallel and is separate and sits within product next to design. So in this system, essentially what happens is projects come from PMs within product, and then they will talk to designers, and designers will essentially reach out externally to the research arm and say, like, we're working on this project. Do you have time? We'd love your help to run this research project. So essentially in this model, the researchers work as internal consultants. Meanwhile, most of what research is doing in this model amounts to independent identification of opportunities, bigger strategic research. So they're focused on understanding how people use product in general. They're not focused on the nitty-gritty of specific page interactions or specific applications or specific flows. So the pros of this are, because research sits outside of design, it makes it much easier for researchers to identify bigger new opportunities, and they have the capacity to shift the company toward customer centricity. But the cons are that, designers are really choosing when to do research because they're reaching out externally and they're saying, researchers, please help us with this. And because of that, the scope of research is oftentimes not well set. And also, because research sits outside of design, they're kind of divorced from the day-to-day challenges of design, and therefore they're not as familiar with the product. So they're not familiar with the challenges that users are facing on a daily basis. And then a third model is kind of a hybrid between the two, where research really straddles the line between sitting within design and outside of design. So in this model, what happens is, it looks in many ways similar. Projects come from PMs, and researchers' time is essentially structurally divided between projects for design and projects outside of design. So their time is really budgeted and divided. So in this model, they will sit and they'll join with PMs and designers at the inception of projects, and they work with designers in the projects from the get-go and help scope. And so in many ways, they're kind of a parallel arm in the same way as they were in the past model, but they're really nestled within design in the sense that they can really understand, okay, what are our specific design goals and how do we scope for that from the get-go? But at the same time, most of what research is doing with the relationship with design amounts to empowering designers to conduct their own research. So research is consulted at the beginning of a project, and then they essentially think, okay, does this problem or does this task merit doing research, or does it merit helping designers do their own research that's more tactical focused, where you're like doing value prop tests or A/B tests, something that's pretty applied. And at the same time, a lot of what research is doing is they're taking the insights that they've garnered from the projects that they've done with design, and they're identifying opportunities and surfacing those broader strategic opportunities from that tactical work to yield new product opportunity. So the pros of this is that it does a good job of bridging tactical and strategic goals. It also facilitates an intimate familiarity with design for researchers because they're involved in all levels of design, and therefore they get to advocate for customers at all levels. So basically, they're advocating for customers in the nitty-gritty of application and page redesign, and they're also advocating for customers when they see, oh, during this little tactical redesign project, we learned there's this bigger customer problem, and addressing that customer problem will create a lot of opportunities for the company. And the cons are that it's a bit harder day to day balancing your time, but it's not really too bad. But it requires more structure and organizational competence. So what to take away from that? So first of all, if you're a researcher, the structure and the way your organization, really where you sit and the name of your role and where you're organized very much dictates the kind of work that's expected of you. So you should be cognizant of that and advocate for not like organizational overhaul or anything like that, but advocate for extra time on your own that's not part of tactical projects, so that way you can be doing strategic research. Or if you feel like you're not close enough to the tactical work that designers are doing, then you should advocate for sitting with them and spending more time with them. Also, you should really be thinking about speaking for the users, and that's how you translate the need for those strategic goals from the tactical research upward. And if you're a designer, you want to think about, okay, so how do you work with research? When are you asking research to do projects that you could probably be doing? And by doing those projects, you would be building new competencies, you would be advancing your career, you would essentially be getting a deeper understanding of the problem space yourself, because, you know, if you do your own research, you'll get a deeper understanding of it than if you ask a researcher to do it. So at the very least, you want to be as involved with research and the research process as possible. And then also, there's nothing a researcher likes more than when a designer talks to them and they say, you know, I was doing this prototyping and I noticed this unique behavior emerging in the data. And I think that could be some strategic opportunity, because it means that we've been thinking about our users the wrong way. And literally, as a researcher, nothing could possibly make me happier than if a designer said that to me. So, you know, see yourself as an expert, which you are as a designer, and surface the insights that you can that go beyond the tactical, because you'll definitely have them. So here's a fun little clip about, I'll just play it. You'll enjoy it. A little break, I guess. Oh, never mind. There we go. Yeah, so I hope you heard that. I hope it captured in the recording. But this is from the classic movie Tron. And yeah. Okay, so talking about project structure, we'll go through a basic redesign this page project, and I'll provide some like fresh takes on new ways that you could think about project structure. So to begin with, core team. When you begin a project, I think the most important thing is focus on questions and broaden your scope and understanding of questions as much as possible. Don't think about goals. So at this point, you shouldn't be thinking, we want to increase conversion by X% or whatever. That's really the wrong way to think about it. You want to be thinking, what are the core questions that we don't know the answers to? And by understanding and make this a team-wide thing. This is not about just the researcher coming up with the questions. This is about asking everyone in the team, building the base of the project should be the questions, not the outcome goals. Because if you're thinking about the outcome goals, those mean different things to different people, right? So increasing conversion by X% for someone in product, if they're just thinking about that, then the conversion might not be significant because you could increase it by 10%, but you're only luring in lower intent users and more of them are converting, and therefore it seems like a win because it's meeting those, numeric goals, but it's not an actual win. So if you're just thinking about the goals, everyone's basically talking a different language. Second thing is look for secret stakeholders. So no matter what company you're at or no matter what organization you're at, people in product, they have a lot of connections. They're thinking about a project in a broad way. They're doing a lot of connecting of the dots, but they're oftentimes thinking about this connecting of the dots process from a more execution-oriented perspective. Who are the people we need to have in the room? And as a researcher, what I always do is I find who are the additional stakeholders who are impacted by this work, not because they need to be consulted, but because they have unique perspectives. They have their own set of questions. They have their own expertise. And by exploring these stakeholder relationships, not only can you learn about the problem in new ways, but you can also identify hidden implications of a project. So say, for instance, you are working on a page redesign that leads people to, buy a bike rack when they purchase a car. If you are routing more people into buying a bike rack, potentially that means that you're discouraging people from buying something else or discouraging them from selecting these added features of the car later on that are less aligned with an outdoors lifestyle, for instance. So you want to think about, from a user experience perspective, how does this redesign process, how does it connect with everything else? A third thing is, and I think this is probably the most important thing of everything. During research, your objective should be to create a shared sense of ownership. You're the one pulling on threads. You're the one exploring things. You're kind of the tip of the spear in this sense. But a lot of the designers that you've been working with, or a lot of the PMs, might have worked on a previous iteration of this research. Or of this project. So let's say they did the last redesign, which means that the research that you're surfacing might indicate that there are things that they could have done better. And I mean, that should be the case because hopefully you're learning something. But by virtue of doing that, you should be doing that in a way where you're empowering them. You are creating the shared sense of ownership. So rather than you owning research, you're the one who brings people into the research process, which makes people feel like whatever redesign work that they're doing, it's not just a manifestation of the insights from your research. It's also a manifestation of their understanding that came about because of that research. So you're really empowering people rather than investigating work that either they've done or someone else has done. And then the fourth thing is, I think it's super important to keep insights very informal with the inner circle of people who are working on the project, on the redesign. So this could be the designers, this could be PMs, this could be other stakeholders. So you want them to attend as many of the research sessions as possible. You want to share notes, you want to brainstorm with them. You want them involved as much as possible. And if you're sharing big things that you've learned with other people outside of this inner circle, that's when you really want to formalize things. You want to capture all of the insights and present them in a totally different template, make it a different audience. And if it's the same audience, then you want to be or not the same audience. If it's the same template, you want to be presenting it in a really different way. And this ties back to that, creating that shared sense of ownership. So if you're overly formal with sharing out your research for people in that project team, it's going to not alienate them, but it's going to make them feel like they're kind of separate from the work. And then finally, you want to empower designers to test and analyze prototypes. So there's never really a process in a research project where you should be handing things off per se. After your insight process, what you should be thinking about is you should be thinking about, okay, now I'm shifting to an empowerment role where my objective is to help designers, help them amplify their work. So whatever prototypes they're testing, help them run the tests and design the tests and analyze the tests in ways that next time they do that same work, you've essentially set them up to be able to do that work on their own in the future. So you should be kind of you're still a much more core part of the process. You're kind of an advisor, but a very hands-on advisor. Cool. So some general final thoughts about how to level up your research game, whether you're a researcher or a designer doing research. So the first is seek hidden implications of whatever you're doing, right? You shouldn't be too focused on the tactical of how do people feel about this button or that button. That is, of course, the foundation of your work, but you should always be looking for, like, what are the extra things, or like what are the implications here? Like, what's perhaps the bigger picture that lies behind the data? What gateways of understanding does this kind of open up or unlock? And then that ties into the integrating strategic goals into tactical research. So if you're redesigning a page, or you're helping designers do the research to figure out how to redesign the page, you should not only be writing your interview guide or building your unmoderated tests or whatever it is to focus on that. You should be thinking about what are the additional questions that we want to ask, extra questions that might not be directly related to that specific tactical question, but will give us a deeper understanding into the customer mindset. So that way we can inform and tie this research together with a broader customer understanding. Third is speaking their language. So this touches on a lot of things. If you're communicating with designers, you want to think about the language of interface, obviously. If you're talking with PMs, if you're identifying new strategic opportunities, you want to be able to speak the language of opportunity sizing. So let's say, for instance, you learn that because customers don't understand the fact that they get a discount when they buy that bike rack in addition to the car, that because of that, they're choosing to not buy a bike rack or any of these additional things. So in that example, you'd want to be able to help PMs understand and do quantitative studies, do surveys, whatever, to figure out what is the population size that we could actually serve that we think would convert if we did this better job of redesigning this page to address this misunderstanding. And then the fourth thing is you should know the business better than anyone in product, right? Because you should have just as deep an understanding of product as PMs do. Obviously, you don't know necessarily the nitty-gritty of all of the numbers and all of this stuff, but you understand it conceptually, and you understand the core of it. You understand the business problems as well as PMs, and you shouldn't be able to design or understand the specific design challenges of designers, but you should know what their design systems are, and you should know the modalities that they use and the ways that they think about problems. And then your area of expertise, of course, is the user. And if you overlay all three of these things, that's really where you can supercharge your work as a researcher, because you can see, oh, we're learning this, which matches up with this design challenge, which matches up with this product challenge. And by understanding those things, it takes your research to a whole nother level. And then just some final thoughts from a behavioral perspective, things that you can do are always pull the thread. So I generally prefer moderated studies over unmoderated studies, because if you're doing moderated studies and you're conducting interviews, you can ask someone a question, they respond, and then just keep pulling on that thread if you feel like something's there. You learn just so much by asking the next question. So a lot of the core skill of research to me is learning how to ask the next question and find the next question and keep pulling on that thread. So make sure you're fundamentally addressing the challenge of the research project, however tactical it is, but then keep pulling on that thread, because no project is its own silo. Everything is connected to everything else. So you want to figure out how a user problem connects to other problems, right? Second is amplify your team. If you're not amplifying your team, then fundamentally you're not accomplishing the goal of research, right? Because as a researcher, you don't get anything done on your own. You only get things done because of the work of designers and PMs and the hard work of other people on your team. So you should be thinking about the work that you do as, my objective is to understand these problems as well as possible, to understand the users as well as possible, so that way our designs and the work that we do can be as good as possible. And so you should be calling out the contributions of designers and the feedback that they provide in the research process. And really, you're there. Your job is really to amplify the work of your team. So I hope I've made enough points about how you're amplifying your own work by doing strategic and tactical research. But in the end of the day, it is about the output of your team. And connected to that is being essential. So I think this came from Airbnb, where basically the way that they determined whether research is important to the institution or not is if everyone feels like you need to have a researcher in the room. So that's how you should be thinking about yourself. You don't want to make yourself essential in the sense that other people can't do their job without you. You want people to think that by having you in the room, they are saving so much time, they are making much better decisions, and in the end of the day, it's better for the company, it's better for the customer, it makes people feel more confident that the work that they're doing is relevant. So you should really think about yourself as, how do I make myself essential to this team? And then finally, you want to let your expertise speak quietly. So the more you learn about your users, the more unique challenges that you uncover about fundamentally challenges that users have in the experience. So you don't want that feedback about what is challenging for users to come from you. You want that to come from the users through you, right? So this is why it's so valuable to play videos or excerpts or audio excerpts from interviews that you've conducted, because your expertise only comes because of the work and the connection that you have with your users. So you want them to be the expert, and you want to fight for them and let them do the fighting, and you're there to kind of hold up their signs. So that's it. And I hope this has been really interesting for you. I hope you've learned a few new ways to think about your role as a researcher or a designer, and how you fit within your team, and how to amplify your team. And with that, I'll bid you adieu.